Sorry to be late. Oh, yeah. Woo!
Good morning. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning to everybody who is now in Clubhouse, also watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and waiting to hear from you, Timothy, what is going on in Japanese politics, because there have been quite a few events that are indeed happening for the first time here in this beautiful country and in Japanese politics as well. So it is, our 192nd episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Esquire, and me, the host, Maya Matsuoka. So, Timothy, no more delays.
Okay.
It's
Thank
on
you
you
very
now.
much.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for a little bit of the delay. I ran into a little bit of a technical problem, and I've got the sunshine right in my face, so I apologize. I've got the very handy hat here. But let's get into what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you. There has been so much going on. If you are a subscriber to the newsletter, you'll notice that this last week I mentioned that sometimes in publishing the synopsis of what we talked about on Sunday, it has a little bit of a moldy feel to it because things are happening at such a brisk pace. Even though I might have a briefing with you on Sunday, by the time I get the synopsis out and I write it on maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, things have moved so quickly forward that it's almost like old news, even though it's been published just 2 days or 3 days later. We are regularly about 5 or 10 days ahead of the news cycle if you're following the Japan Times or some of the other news cycles. So I very much appreciate you tuning in and participating in our discussion. And as you know, if you're a new subscriber to this program, this is Japanese Politics One-on-One. So I give you a briefing on what's going on, and then we open the channel. You can communicate to the audience, to me, tell me I'm wrong, or challenge me on something, or feed us new information or insight through communicating with Maya, or even sometimes coming up on stage. The yen closed out this week on Friday at $149.16 to the yen. This is a 4.4% drop in the value. This is the worst week for the yen value since 2009. This is right on the cusp of the new prime minister being elected less than 2 weeks ago. So it's been very, very volatile. He, as you know, is in Laos. He was in Laos. He left on Thursday night. He was there Friday, came back Saturday. I think 2 good days of productive meetings. His first foray into the international arena. I think he did pretty well. The news reports say that he kept a rather low profile. He doesn't have the diplomatic chops that Mr. Kishida did, but Mr. Kishida is with him. He's a central figure in his administration. And I think based on the advice that he received, he kept a relatively low profile. He didn't try and drive much of the bus. He had significant meetings with the Chinese premier, with the president of South Korea, and a couple of other main leaders, as you would expect in a global ASEAN meeting in Laos. But I don't think he really stepped out too far. This idea of the Asia NATO, as you followed it, if you've been watching this channel, but also other channels too, it was floated as a trial balloon and then quickly just exploded and popped, and it was a non-issue. It wasn't even mentioned, I think, in ASEAN. There's a lot more going on there. The House was dissolved, as you know, 4 days ago. So the Prime Minister had a very, very tough week. A week ago today, we were reporting on what was coming up. He had 3 days of tough meetings. On Monday, he had a podium speech, no questions, but he addressed the joint session of the Parliament. And then on Tuesday, he took questions from the opposition party, and for about 90 minutes, they had an opportunity to quiz him and to question him back and forth, a little bit of give and take there. So you could see revealed what his ideas are, what his his manifesto is for the LDP and going forward. And then on Wednesday, he had another policy speech that didn't allow for a lot of back and forth. And after his speech, then he closed the diet, and then he prepared to leave for Laos. In the meantime, every political party issued their own manifesto. The Constitutional Democratic Party and Mr. Noda pronounced their platform for the election. The Constitutional Democratic Party, Ishin no Kai, all of the parties issued their own policy statements on what they intend to do. This is going to be a tough fight. The LDP came out with a pronouncement. One of the issues was if Mr. Ishiba is actually going to clean up the LDP, how is he going to do that? How is he going to convince the voters that the LDP is in a new zone? And one of the ideas was all of the LDP members who were tainted by the campaign fund scandal, or by the slush fund that was initially created by the Abe faction more than 20 years ago, and came to the public eye about a little bit less than a year ago, and just created this huge tension, actually forced the dissolution of the faction. So there's only one faction left, Mr. Aso's faction, and has created such huge turmoil that it puts the LDP at risk for actually managing the government and being in charge of the administration. So much has happened there. Real wages fell in the meantime. They just announced about a 0.6% drop in real wages. This is for September, so it's a little bit lagged behind. It doesn't have an immediate impact on the current prime minister. It doesn't say that he's a bad prime minister because wages have fallen. That was just a little bit, a couple of weeks earlier, but it does implicate the new administration and tells the financiers what they need to be doing to get the economy back on track and to calm down inflation. We've got more information on that. And the LDP decided on Wednesday to not dismiss, but kind of downgrade at least 12 members of the LDP who had taken money that were somewhat punished earlier. You might have remembered when Mr. Kishida was prime minister, he demoted them. He said, you have to give up your party posts or your chairman posts in committees, that sort of thing. And these 12 did. They're repenting. They're kind of keeping a low profile, but it wasn't enough. And the LDP came back again and said, in this election cycle, of all of the people, maybe 51 or so members, mostly in the Abe faction, who took some money, 12 of them are not going to receive the endorsement of the LDP. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that on the endorsement for their candidacy in their election district, the LDP is not going to be standing on the sound truck, and the prime minister isn't going to be visiting them and holding the microphone and saying, this is a great guy. The other thing is that for many of these politicians, if you are in a single seat district, if you are in a district that says, I'm Tim Langley and vote for me because I'm Tim Langley, if you fail there and you have your name on the list of candidates for the proportional representation, there are 2 voting slots. You vote for the individual, you vote for Tim Langley or maybe his competitor, but you can also vote for the LDP or for the any one of the other parties. And depending on how many votes they get, the names that are listed there. So the endorsement does not qualify these 12 individuals to be on both lists. So in the previous election, many of them, I think of the 12, maybe 6 of them were rescued by being on both lists. So that might indicate that at least 12 are really at risk in this next election. So it's just a real mess that we've got facing here. We're not going to really know too much until the election starts. The election starts in 2 days, on the 15th, and it'll run for 12 days. but I don't want to get too much into it. Maya, I know you want to give a plug to our sponsor, so let me just take a breath and turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you for that, Timothy. And yes, a very big thank you to our first sponsor, Kanchu, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku, Kanchu. So Kanchu offers bilingual services to individuals who want to buy and sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. They also do property management and investment property. So if you want to work with them, either in English or Japanese, please reach out to James Howell at james@kanachu.com, or you can connect with James on LinkedIn as well. So they will talk with you and hear you out and customize their services to your needs. So please feel free to do that and yes, connect with James. So Timothy, once again, it's over to you. Can you?
Thank you very much. Yes.
You can hear me. Yes. Okay. Great.
Okay.
So
I noticed as I was going through my briefing, I kept wondering how come Maya has her frame up there too. I'm supposed to be giving the briefing. Then I remembered you've got, this is just supposed to be a teaser, and I'm going on and on. So I apologize about that.
okay, thank you for being so open and transparent. Okay, yes, now the screen is going to you only. You have
Yay! Thank
to
you very
yourself.
much. Okay. So now
Okay.
that I've got the screen all to myself, I don't know if we'll be interrupted by Maya's cat again, but I am here in
Right.
Katsuyama, beautiful Katsuyama. This is the Tokyo Bay, and you can see ships going back and forth. Tokyo Bay is, or Tokyo, the city of Tokyo is this way. By sailing vessel, maybe about 6 hours. By car, maybe an hour and a half. So it's a 3-day weekend, as everybody knows. Tomorrow is sports day. So I've got 3 days here where I can be working on the boats and cleaning up the harbor and things like that. Right across in the back of me is Misaki, which is the point of the peninsula on Yokohama. The weather is a little bit overcast. You can't see Mount Fuji, but as the autumn begins to fade away and we get into the winter months, the skies become much crisper and you can see all of Mount Fuji. It's really a great vista from here. I don't know if we'll be doing so many more briefings from this vantage point, but in any event, on to the news. Thursday started the campaign for the upper house seat in Iwate. You will remember that there was an upper house member. Her name is Megumi Hirose, who she hired a policy secretary and then she let him go, or he was her husband or something like that. And the money for the policy secretary that was being paid by the state was being diverted into personal funds. Miss Hirose was an LDP member. She was identified. The public prosecutors arrested her without putting her, in jail. They just put her on ice. And as a consequence of that, she resigned from that seat. And then there's a by-election twice a year. The by-election for this upper house fell on this month, on the 27th of this month. And this is the whole trigger for why we're having an election on the for the lower house on the 27th, to combine those, to have the upper house election for this by-election, this seat that was vacated, excuse me, and the 467 or so seats in the lower house at the same time. And part of the reason for that, and you'll remember that when Mr. Ishiba was campaigning, he said, I don't want to have a snap election very quick. I want to have a discussion with all of the interested parties, the opposition parties. We'll have budget hearings. We'll talk about what's going to happen. And maybe we'll have a snap election. As soon as he became prime minister, he called for an election at the soonest possible time, which was the 27th. This was dictated by his newly appointed chief cabinet, LDP secretary, Mr. Moriyama, who insisted that he has the election at the soonest possible time. So, as we know, because it's been a week now, Mr. Ishiba was criticized for flip-flopping, not just on that, but on a couple of other issues. But this election campaign in Iwate, the LDP is not even going to run a candidate because the last LDP person who held that position put money in her pocket. You've got the Abe faction and the Nikai faction also putting money in their pocket, creating this huge brouhaha. So the indications are that the LDP is not going to be doing very well in this election cycle. And so people are very excited and looking at that. So the election for Iwate consists of 5 other candidates. The LDP isn't running a candidate, so that's 1 seat less in the upper house that the LDP will hold. The upper house doesn't go up for an election until after the summer of 2025. So we'll focus on that one later. But in the current situation, the diet has been closed. The election starts in 2 days. Right now, there are 1,170 candidates for the 467 seats. So this is kind of not a mad rush, but it is a big number of people who are vying for that small number of seats. It's not a small number, almost 500 seats, 467. You've got, almost, 1,200 candidates that are going to be vying for those. Of the 465 seats, 289 of those are in single district seats and 176 are in the proportional seats. So the largest number, the 289, are for individuals who pronounce their personal policies, their heritage, what they're going to do for their constituency based on their own name. And in the dynamics of Japanese politics, people who win an election based on their heritage, on what they said on the podium, on drumming up support, they have a higher profile than those who are elected as a proportional representation. So if you're not that popular, if you don't have that much personal persuasion or that much money, or you haven't had that much experience, you would probably list on the proportional list for your particular party. So depending on how the party does, and probably the Constitutional Democratic Party will do exceedingly well this year, and the LDP will not do as well. And the margins are not that close. But as far as the different parties are concerned, the LDP will run in all but 11 of these districts. So there are 289 for the direct single seat constituencies, 176 for the proportional. The LDP will have a candidate in all of those except for 11. And in those 11, it is decided to refrain from putting a candidate in so that the Komeito can run unopposed. The Constitutional Democratic Party will run in 200 of these election districts. Excuse me. The Communists will run in 210. They're going to be running 10 more candidates than the Constitutional Democratic Party. And that gives you an idea of the dynamic and the kind of breadth of the Japanese Communist Party. It's not like the Chinese Communist Party, but it is a very well-respected political party. They're going to be running a lot of candidates. And let me see. Ishin will run 160 candidates, and the Democratic People's Party will run 40 candidates. And the reason for this kind of discrepancy is finding the people who will be a candidate for you, who will espouse the positions and the policies and the manifesto that you have produced. But also, people generally have another job. They have another livelihood. And if you're running for an election, you're not being a lawyer, you're not being a banker, you're not being the businessman running your family's company. So you have to have a certain amount of personal throw weight to do that. And the Constitutional Democratic Party, and in particular Ishin, they see this opportunity to challenge the LDP. They've known this for a while, but not to the degree that we are actually facing it now. So they haven't been able to generate enough candidates. And if you're running for an election and you lose, what are you going to do? Have you given up your earlier job? Can you go back to where it was that you were working? Nobody likes a loser. Everybody loves a winner. It's the same here as it is anywhere else. So the stakes are rather high, as you know. Currently, of the 465 seats in the upper house, the lower house, the LDP holds 258 of those seats as of today. That's 55%. So they have a majority, a thin majority. That means that they have 28 people beyond what is 50%. In combination with Komeito comes to the party with 32 seats in the lower house. So between the two of them, they hold 62% of the lower house. That's today. So with Komeito in coalition with the LDP, they have 58 extra seats beyond the majority. So that means that in this current election, and it's pretty tough because a lot of the people who have been tainted have been published as taking money, not paying taxes, not even reporting it. It's a hard argument to make to voters to vote for me, even though I took the money. I'm defending you, I'm representing you, I'm a good guy, I belong to the LDP. That's a hard pitch to sell, especially if you've got Qiang or Komeito or the Constitutional Democratic Party as a competitor saying, you know, the reason why we are in so much trouble, the reason why the economy is in turmoil, it's because of people like this. It's really something you can predict pretty quickly that those that are tainted are going to be lambasted, and probably voters are going to write in the other candidates' names. So it's something that we will be watching. The election hasn't started another 2 days, and then the airways will be filled with the sound trucks driving through the neighborhoods and the billboards that come up. So there will be boards that election boards that will be coming up too. Remember the controversy we had with the election for Tokyo governor and the 50 plus candidates for the Tokyo governor and how those were used. So we'll keep a close eye on that and report to you next week. The number of bankruptcies in Japan has exploded, as perhaps you might have expected. 3 plus years after COVID, many of these companies, especially the service companies, received funds from the government to keep afloat, to keep people employed, even though there wasn't a lot of business justification for that. And now it comes time to pay the piper. It's been 3 years. Some of the loans that the government gave out at very low interest rates, they need to repay those loans. And as a consequence, the number of bankruptcies has increased dramatically. 4,990 bankruptcies reported over the last 3 months. And that's about 18.6% higher than this time last year, almost 20%. That's enormous. And the bankruptcies have been blamed on higher prices, inflation, on the weak yen, which inflates the cost of imported goods. And the hardest hit companies are manufacturing, retail, as you would expect, retail including services, and in particular, restaurants. Restaurants have been really hard hit. And also the people who have claimed for bankruptcy have also complained that the labor shortage. So as the Japanese population continues to decline, the number of people that are coming into the market, for example, foreign workers, it's just not in enough volume, it's not enough velocity to keep that going. Although you will notice many foreigners, if you're walking through Shibuya, Aoyama, anywhere in Tokyo, anywhere in some of the bigger cities, it's just unmistakable how many foreigners are here, but many of them are just on tourist visas. But even when you're walking through town and going to restaurants, you will notice a larger number of foreigners who are doing some of these jobs. So it's a very interesting time in Japan's labor market. They're trying to increase the wages, but although they increase the wages, the earning power that is produced is falling. So that was another piece of news that came out this week, that real wages fell for the first time in 3 months. Although wages have increased, in real money, the wages have decreased. And so even though you're scrambling, you're getting a bonus, you're maybe getting a pay raise, the amount of purchasing power that you possess in Japan these days has fallen. And so that's another thing that the current prime minister has to deal with. And he's working on that very, very diligently, starting Well, he's got 2 days and then an election, and then he's going to be working on the election. So it's a real funny time. The other thing that's interesting is that we have 23 days before the election of 23 days before the U.S. presidential election, and that will be a dramatic impact that Japan will feel as well. Whether it's Trump or Kamala Harris as president of the United States, that will have a impact on Japanese politics, on the Japanese economy, on the yen, on the stock market, on so many other things. So it's something that's very carefully watched. Let me see, where are we now? I want to give you some information on the justice minister. So it always happens that in a new cabinet, in a new administration, there are some people in the cabinet that Bunshun picks up, or that there's a little story that has been kind of swept aside. It hasn't reached much attention, but it came out very quickly once the cabinet was announced that the justice minister, Hideki Makihara, had in fact been somewhat more friendly with the Unification Church than he announced. In fact, he didn't meet the deadline that was imposed by the Secretary General of the LDP when it first came out that the Unification Church was in bed with many people in the parliament, particularly with the Abe faction. Mr. Makihara was a little bit late in providing a full disclosure. In fact, he really never fessed up during that particular period of time. And now it's come out that between him and his secretary, 37 visits to the Unification Church. So as Justice Minister, he's catching a lot of heat just this last week. These kinds of stories always pop up. It was the Prime Minister was criticized for that, and the Prime Minister put his Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary, not the Chief Cabinet Secretary, the Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary, to make a statement that he has no plans to investigate because this is all old news and there's nothing to see here, so please move on. That's an issue that will probably come up after the election, but during the election, because the Justice Minister also needs to go up for election. We'll have the election. It'll be a 15-day election. On the 27th is election day. We will find out who won, who lost. The Prime Minister will come back. They will reopen the Diet, and the new members will come in and get their badges. 467 new people coming in to get their badges. The Emperor will open up the Diet. So there'll be a lot of fanfare there. And then maybe a new cabinet will be constructed depending on the outcome of the election. Canada, you might remember we announced last week the icebreaker, the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the William Laurier, a 83-meter icebreaker, visited Tokyo, visited here in Yokohama Harbor. It was the first time for the Canadian Coast Guard to visit Japan on some sort of a mission, and it turns out that we've received more news this last week. The Canadian ambassador announced that this is just the first foray, that Canada will actually be participating much more actively, not just in Japan, but in the entire region here for illegal fishing and pirating of goods in the region. And this is basically sticking a finger in the eye of China. You'll remember China has said, we're not going to buy any more fish stock from Japan, the entire country, because of Fukushima and because of the tainted water, and now everybody's going to die if they eat the fish. So we're not going to do that. No more fish from Japan, no more scallops, no hotate, all of that stuff. That's really hurt the fishing industry here. The United States has come in to purchase a lot of that excess fish stock, but also you'll see that the prices have dropped because the demand, they've been able to feed that demand, which included China. And Russia jumped in too. Russia jumped in and said, we're going to follow the same policy as China. We're not going to import any of this. So in the same time that they're saying that, though, the Chinese fishing fleet is raiding Japanese fishing zones and taking the fish from there and bringing it back home. So this is a kind of a counter action to, if the Chinese are going to diminish the amount of food import that they're going to have, but still send their boats over to pilfer, they're going to have something to deal with, and the Canadians are coming in pretty strong on that. And I think that's a pretty significant move. It's kind of reflective of what other countries are doing. Everybody's trying to do their fair share, I guess. Given Canadian politics and diplomacy, they really can't come in as strong as maybe the Australians, the New Zealanders, the British have come in with military might, with armaments, with flights and that sort of thing. But this is a pretty helpful move, and I think they should be congratulated with it. But once again, this lattice work of allies and like-minded partners just continues to grow. And so who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. It's a campaign time now. A lot is going to happen in the next 25 days. So please stay tuned. I'll continue to report this to you, and I'd like to open it up for questions from those of you who in the audience who would like to pursue any particular issue, or if you've got an issue of importance that you want to discuss with us, let's get at it. Maya? Maya's petting her cat. She's gonna unclick mute pretty soon. There we go.
Right, indeed, yes. So you got me once again this time. And I tried so very hard not to disturb your presentation, with my cat and the shuffling of papers and so on and so on. So see what happens.
Yes, thank you, Maya.
All right, you're very welcome. Before we continue with the questions and answers, I want to say thank you to our other sponsor, Houze Inc. So Houze Inc. offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction, and renovations, plus commercial building construction. To benefit from their services, either in English or in Japanese, connect with Hana Urushizawa Howell on LinkedIn. You will also find her contact details in the description of the video on YouTube. So reach out to her if you have any ideas for projects, future projects in the real estate field. Hannah will be there for you, as well as James Howell. Well, thank you very much for this. Timothy, we have accumulated quite a few questions already. So I'll start with them and try to follow, first of all, them by the time, based on the time they were posted, or sometimes I'll try to also group them depending, based on the topic.
Okay.
So, all right. So the very first one actually we received it this morning before we started the presentation actually, and it is from Byron. So
Byron keeps doing that. Byron, thank you very much. Even before the show starts, he's got a list of 2 or 3 questions trying to catch me off guard. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Byron. And here we go. So what is the probability of the LDP splitting into separate conservative and progressive political parties? The old DPJ split into the CDPJ and the DPFP. In most parliamentary democracies, that generally happens. It is said that members of parliament in Japan are very risk-averse. Would that be the factor that prevented such a split in the LDP so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's power in numbers, and the LDP will do everything to maintain that at least 50% parity. That means in combination with LDP and Komeito, they need to lose between them 57 seats in order for them to lose the majority. That means they can elect the entire cabinet and the committee seats. I mean, it's not just the cabinet, it's also the committees that run the Diet, the parliamentary affairs, and all the different issues. They get to put their person, an LDP person, as the chairman of those committees. So in the event that, and I think this is a little bit different than Byron's question, in the event that they lose the majority, 57 seats between Komeito and the LDP, they'll probably just bring somebody else in, maybe the Democratic Party, People's Party. I think that party has about 30 members. But I think what Byron is asking is a little bit more sophisticated question. He's saying the LDP now, it's got this faction that's beginning to pull apart. You've got Ishiba, who is supporting a lot of these members, and then you've got a bunch of members, maybe 51 members, but 12 in particular, who are not going to receive the endorsement of the LDP. And so you put yourself in their position. They're not going to be endorsed by the LDP, even though they have been strong supporters and members. And the money that they received, it was because somebody told them to take it and just keep it quiet. And, what are you going to do when somebody tells you that? I mean, your position within your faction depends on following orders that somebody has given to you. And that Mr. Big is hardly ever identified, although we kind of guess or know who it is. And in fact, we reported last week that the accountant for the Abe faction was sentenced to 5 years in prison that was suspended. But when he had his testimony, he said, well, I'm just an accountant. I'm 77 years old. They told me what to do, and I just did it. That's what I get paid for. So that story is not completely out there yet. So yes, there could be this break apart that comes, and then you've got what was originally the largest political party in Japanese politics, the LDP, breaking up into two similar kinds of parties, just because one of them is mad at the other because you should have supported me and you threw me out, and now I won the election, but now I don't want to be a member of the LDP. By the way, if you received tainted money and you're not endorsed by the LDP, if you win the election, then the LDP says, okay, all is forgiven, come on back in. So it's not that these people will disappear, but I think as Byron's question indicates, there is a lot of ire and anger and disappointment at the way this is handled. But I mean, if you're in Mr. Ishiba's shoes, what are you going to do? You have to do something to tell the population, the LDP is here for you. We made some mistakes. I've executed those guys. They're going to run on their own, but we're going to come up with a new plan and a new clean government. So it's very difficult. So the population, the voters will finally have their say. They haven't had their say for 3 years, 3.5 years now. And now they get to tell people who are running the government what they think about the slush fund, about the handling, about Mr. Kishida's administration, and about how they feel about Mr. Ishiba. And the jury is still out on that. I mean, he's been prime minister for less than 2 weeks, so a lot to watch.
It's interesting, though. Yes, yesterday I had a get-together with colleagues at university, and everybody said that they were surprised, actually, that Mr. Ishiba won the premiership, and that they were not happy with that. And those are ordinary people. There were about 40 people there, and the Japanese members of that party, they actually commented about that. So it was interesting in what you say. Of course, my saying now is anecdotal, but it seems that a lot of the voters here feel that way. So it will be interesting, yes, to observe what happens.
Can I make one more point there? Sanai Takaichi, she was one of the candidates for prime minister. A lot of people are disappointed that she didn't get it. And she is very hot on the wish list of members of the LDP, particularly those who didn't get the endorsement, for her to come and speak on the loudspeaker on their behalf. So yes, there's this division, as Byron's question kind of indicated. If you're not going to get Mr. Ishiba or anybody in the cabinet to speak on your behalf, there are other people that will speak on your behalf. And if those people more likely win than lose, now you've got this gravitational pull that's going forward. And also, Yasukuni will be having a autumn memorial at the end of this next week. And who goes to pay their respects will be closely watched. Sanai Takaichi will be there, but will the prime minister be there? Will the defense minister be there? So it's something that will be highly watched. And let's see what happens in Yasukuni. I'll report on it this time next week.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. And moving to the next questions. So it is... Right. Okay. Before we go... before we moved to the diplomatic relations and external relations and so on. So I would like to read all the comments and questions so far about the domestic politics.
Okay.
So Tunes, please stick with us, and I'll get to your question as well. So here we've got a question from Manabe-san. The question is, could you please explain the structure of dowing of corporations and organizations in elections? Also, the influence of the Unification Church. So I believe, Manabe-san, I asked you a clarifying question, and I hope that I haven't gotten it wrong. The question is about the support that corporations grant to political parties during election time. So, Timothy, if you can comment on this, please do.
It's a great question. So, as you know, Japan is the structure of society here is top down, even in politics. So you've got the emperor at the top, and then you've got the parliament, and you've got members of parliament, you've got the bureaucracy, and then you've got the voters, and it's pretty much repeated throughout the rest of society, from the patriarchal head of the family to the older brother, and then the related relatives, and then the family members. So in corporations too, what the boss says, what the CEO says in a company pronouncement carries massive weight. And everybody knows what keiretsu is. Keiretsu is the practice of sharing interlocking shareholdings. And if you're in the Mitsubishi group, then you're going to buy the Mitsubishi produced beer from Sapporo or Kirin, and you're not going to touch the other ones. And this goes throughout the entire corporate structure. So similarly, if the president of a company likes a particular policy or likes a particular candidate, he will say it to his, in his newsletter or to his committee meetings or whatever. And people, generally speaking, in lockstep, will follow that. They'll say, look, voting for this person, I don't know much about politics, but my boss says it's good for the company. So if it's good for the company, I'm going to vote that way. So that power of persuasion from the top coming down is huge, and that's what Keidanren is all about. Keidanren is to manage that sort of thing. Keidanren is the largest political machine in Japan, very powerful business lobby, and they help facilitate that as well. So I hope that answers Manabe-san's question.
Right, and then his second question is about the Unification Church, and what was the role of Unification Church during election time?
Okay, so just to step back a little bit, for those of you who don't know about the Unification Church, it was a South Korean organization that has spread throughout the world, and it grew in Japan and was very, very popular among a certain class of individuals. And as they got stronger and they got more people to join them, they practiced tithing. So that means if you're a member, then you're going to tithe, you're going to give a certain amount of money. And in preparation for you to go to the other world, maybe you'll sign documents that say your inheritance or your land is going to be transferred to the Unification Church. And after doing that for several dozen years, they followed the practice that Komeito laid out. Komeito did the same thing. Komeito became a political arm of Soka Gakkai. Soka Gakkai is also a religious organization, and they did the same thing. They created a political arm, and that's what the Unification Church wanted to do too. So they kind of moved a little bit too aggressively, and they moved very, very aggressively and they received a great open arms with the Abe faction. So the Abe faction members were going to Unification Church meetings and talking about how great it was and how important it is to Japanese society. And so in the election campaign, what they do is they don't, there's only a certain amount of money that you can give, and you do need to report it, but you can contribute volunteers to help you put up posters and do things in the election and in the campaign. And if you've been in Tokyo and you see those boards that had the faces for the governor's campaign, more than 50 of them, those posters need to be put on by volunteers. The government doesn't do that. The central government doesn't do that. And also the central government doesn't put posters on all of the billboards. That's the job of the candidates. You have a certain position, you have block number 13, and that's the block that you put it, but you have to have volunteers that put that up. And in many of these blocks, at least with the campaign for governor, they were left blank, as you'll remember. And then some of them, they had the same picture of a candidate or a person or somebody who was selling soap, and that became a big issue about selling that valuable space. But I hope that somewhat responds. The Unification Church is a big organization. It wants to be politically involved. It will volunteer at the time of its members. And like Komeito says, we're going to vote this way. Everybody in Komeito votes that way. It's a very dependable voting bloc. And the Unification Church was attempting to achieve the same thing. But now they are defunct. They've been identified as being too deep into politics. And the assassination of Mr. Abe brought that all out into the forefront about tithing, about the inheritance, about how they were able to manipulate old people to sign away their family wealth upon their death, or maybe even while they're still alive. So that was one of the evil things. And it's the jury is still not out. I mean, they have been disbanded, but the court hearings still continue, and people who have been involved and taken money from them and have been participating in their rallies, like the report with the justice minister, it's still coming out. It hasn't all been fully vetted. So in this election campaign, you'll hear a lot more of it.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And Manabe-san, I hope that I didn't misunderstand your question. And we're moving now to external ties and external relations. So we've got a question from Tunes on YouTube. And the question is, can you speak about Ishiba and Lee agreeing to strategic ties as mentioned by Gigi Press?
Oh, that's a loaded one, and that's a very deep question. Tado Aso also, so it's their Independence Day this week, and or it might have been last week, but it's similarly North Korea's Independence Day as well. So Tado Aso was invited to make some statements, and he referred to Taiwan as a country. This is an important country for us, and we need to be protecting them, and we need to be sharing our assets and making sure that they're not overtaken. And when you call Taiwan a country, then that upsets the Chinese. So I also think that Mr. Ishiba is also very concerned about keeping Taiwan as an independent country, can I say? So it is a province. It's a rebel province of China. China has said it wants to reunite either through force, if necessary, or through annexation, or through the voting bloc, Taiwan. So that's this whole big deal that we have going on in Asia now. We had anticipated that if there was going to be a kinetic action within the next 10 years, it would be in this region, and it hasn't. It happened first in Ukraine, then in the Middle East, and it's still, I think, because all of the countries, particularly the United States, realize how important this region of the world is. They've got this lattice work of like-minded countries, and the Chinese want to move forward, and they're always countered. You had the Japanese destroyer pass through the Taiwan Straits 2 weeks ago. You've got the Canadian Coast Guard joining into the fray to help a little bit of the policing there. So it's a huge multi-country action to kind of prevent the Chinese from actually exercising that. And hopefully, I think the thinking is that the Chinese economy has been on a real run. It's suffered a little bit. You've got some problems there now. So maybe this desire, this huge military force. The problem with having a military force, if you don't use it, it really doesn't mean anything. So the reason why you're building a military force is because you have an objective in mind. You're not otherwise going to be spending that much money. So the fear is that this is a design from the Chinese leadership to retake Taiwan and make it one country again. And Mr. Lee has said he will fight that annexation or that potential annexation. And I think to hear from Mr. Ishiba and also from Mr. Aso. Mr. Aso is, he's not the deputy prime minister anymore. We talked about this last week. He was supposed to be, or he thought he was supposed to be. They forgot when they announced the cabinet, and then they made him supreme advisor, which is neither here nor there, and I think he understands that too. But still, he's got some very serious political chops, and when he says something, people listen. He is prone to making not just off-color statements, but also speaking a little bit out of turn. But it did receive a lot of press there. So yeah, I hope this responds somewhat about the question. Who was it from?
Oh, that's from Tunes.
Tunes.
Yes.
So if I didn't really elaborate enough, why don't you come on board and give us a little bit of your 2 cents on that?
Right. Okay, yes. Thank you very much for the question, Tunes. And please, yes, let us know whether this answer was satisfying or not. And then we move on with Joseph. Joseph Murphy, thank you very much for your question and for watching. So we've got, did I understand correctly that Canadian naval vessels such as this first to visit icebreaker will perhaps in the future exercise or cooperate with Japan naval self-defense forces? By the way, ice-class ships are increasingly important because of thawing Arctic. I wonder if Japan has any of these.
Oh, sure they do. An icebreaker you're talking about. Thanks very much, Joseph, for tuning in. I know you're coming from all the way from the United States to attend. Yes, it is a remarkable piece of news that this icebreaker, 83 meter, that's a big boat, coming to Tokyo for 4 days. It was the first excursion of the Coast Guard. So you can imagine that along the west coast of Canada, they're beefing up their Coast Guard. I mean, it's a long trip from Canada to Japan, but they said the ambassador from Canada said just this last week, it's not just Japan, it's going as far as the Philippines. We're going to be help policing this entire region just on the Coast Guard level. And you might not know, Canadian Coast Guard vessels don't have guns on them. They have water cannons, but they're not armed, at least to my knowledge, with weaponry. So in terms of surveillance and policing, that's a role that they're going to play. They also joined forces with Korea in Chitose in Hokkaido. So there's a lot of action up there with the Coast Guard and doing joint exercises. The ice up there in Hokkaido is also pretty fierce. And yes, the Japan Self-Defense Forces has a fleet of icebreakers as well. Thanks for the question, Jeff.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Timothy. And we move on with Yuka. Yuka, good evening to you. It is our morning. I think that you're in the United States. And thank you for the compliment. Timothy, this is for you. I love Tim's hat.
Isn't that great?
Yes, it is indeed. Okay, now my question. Mr. Ishiba said during press conference on the 12th of October that he would work hard to revise the Japan-US Status of Forces Agreement. What exactly does he want to accomplish to improve Japan's position in this agreement?
So, have you ever given a bath to a dog and then you get the dog all wet, and then when the dog is kind of ready, he just goes like this? I think when the prime minister made that comment, the United States kind of did this, you know? What in the hell are you talking about? Revising the status of forces. We were good with Mr. Kishida. Mr. Kishida was supporting us. He announced on his watch going from 1% to 2% of defense spending. A lot of that falls on the United States. The United States provides this nuclear umbrella, and when Trump was in office, pay your fair share. So there's a little bit of rumbling there. The status of forces agreement between the United States and Japan is the linchpin of the relationship between Japan and the United States, mostly focused on Okinawa, but spread throughout. There was a crash of a helicopter here on Honshu just this last week. But the U.S. forces are spread throughout, and they have full access. They've got great integration. The United States is hosting its central command. There will be a joint command in Tokyo between the self-defense forces and United States forces. And yes, if the status of forces agreement between the United States and Japan undergoes any change, it's Well, that's a really big deal, and probably the prime minister was talking about that also with the frame of reference of having an Asian NATO here
Right.
focused on Japan. And I think that one was like a lead balloon. It just sunk to the bottom of the ocean. It was dispelled. And I think likewise with the status of forces. But the status of forces agreement, I mean, that thing is very broad and it's already undergoing changes. But I don't think in the way that was implicated by the prime minister's comments. You've got this huge melding of forces, not just of the United States, but also of these other countries, Europe, France, um, Britain, Australia. They're also developing their own kind of status of forces agreements. Even Italy, they're developing with Britain and Japan the advanced next generation fighters that will go on stream in about 5 or 6 years. So there's a lot going on there. But this comment about the status of forces, and I think we need to put that under the microscope and look at that. I think that upset people a lot. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that when Mr. Ishiba, like the friends that you had your barbecue with, Maya, when Mr. Ishiba became prime minister, the comment coming out and published on X by the U.S. ambassador Rahm Emanuel was very, very terse, very brief. Congratulations. I hope you have a good life. Good luck. Something like that. So it wasn't full of flowers and fanfare. So I think for the United States too, they were not so pleased with the selection of Mr. Ishiba. We'll see. Once again, and I don't want to make predictions, but it is possible that this could be one of the shortest premierships, one of the shortest administrations following this election. We're not going to know. Dan Harada and I, as you well know, Maya, we're going to have a briefing 4 days before the election. That's in about 2 weeks on a Thursday during lunchtime. We're going to talk about what the election is, and we'll have a little bit more gritty details on what the possibilities are. So
Yes.
stay tuned for that.
Stay tuned for that indeed. And well, thank you very much for that, Timothy. I have a question to you, and we're going back, well, to domestic politics because you went there already. My question to you is about Komeito endorsing those LDP candidates who actually were embroiled in the slush fund scandal. And they're not going to be endorsed by the LDP, but Komeito said, yeah, we'll be, behind you. So what or how do you read that? What is behind? What are the motives? Or what
Okay.
are of Komeito?
That's a great observation. It's very delicate. Let me just explain a little bit more for the
Yeah,
audience. So
please.
the LDP said, of these 12, we are not going to endorse you. You are on your own. And if you win, then you come back to you're still an LDP. You're just not getting all of the benefits of being an LDP member. And it's not just fat cats that are those 12. There are a couple of members that are 4-term candidates. So they've won 4 terms. There's nobody in the 3-term category, but there's a couple in the 4-term category. And you're still not quite a made man. If you're 3, it's very up and down whether you're going to be reelected. But 4 terms, you've survived 4 elections. The likelihood of you succeeding yourself is rather high unless you have some sort of blemish, like taking money and put it in your pocket. So some of these members are running in a district that the Komeito has said, we're not going to run in that district because you've given us 11 seats that you're not going to run a candidate, LDP. So you're leaving us alone in those candidates, in those seats, and the likelihood of us winning is very high. Similarly, we traded with you. We're not going to run a Komeito person in some of these districts. And in some of those districts, we have to support or endorse the LDP member, even though he's got stuff all over him.
Right.
Because what are they going to tell their constituents? It's a bad thing. Please vote for this guy, even though he put money in his pocket. But there's a tip for the tat. We got 11 seats over here where they're leaving us alone, so we kind of have to do it. So that's the dynamic that's going on there. If they don't endorse them, then maybe their voters, their constituents, the people who belong to Komeito who vote the way they're told to vote, if they're not given an adequate avenue, please hold your nose and vote for the LDP because they're giving us these 11 seats elsewhere. So just, Machiavelli, the greater good is being served by that. But if they don't give them the instructions and they say vote with your conscience, then probably they're not going to vote for the LDP. And now, once again, the LDP vote falls. Maybe the coalition, Komeito and LDP, falls below that 50% level. It's up in the air. So, yeah, it's very dicey. And the decisions that are thrust upon Komeito must just be infuriating because the name Komeito is the Clean Government Party. And they're in
Indeed.
bed with the LDP. And so, gosh, thanks a lot, buddy. Yeah.
Indeed. So that's really, how can I say, an intriguing dynamic right there. But thank you for clarifying that because, as you said, everybody thinks of Komeito as the party that is always, well, it stands for transparency and fairness and everything. And suddenly we've got this situation.
Definitely, it doesn't stand for not reporting your taxes and putting the money in your pocket. It doesn't
Right.
stand for that.
Right. Okay, so thank you for that, Timothy. It looks like we have gone through all the comments and questions already. Okay, that's nice. So, and I can see that your computer is actually getting quite hot because of the picture I get, and which means that it's better to let you go since we already, yes, answered the questions and everything. Thanks a lot for that. And thank you for reporting once again. From Deborah, we have a very nice comment about your background, beautiful sky, beautiful sea. So, yes, indeed. Thank you for choosing that location. Deborah, well, thank you for being with us. And to everybody who listened to this episode once again, thanks a lot. We
Thanks,
wish you
Deborah.
a great Sunday. And if you're in Japan, also a great Monday because tomorrow is,
Monday.
yes, tomorrow is a national holiday here. So, public holiday actually. And people are not at work, students are at home, and everybody probably,
And,
or many people
and
are
the weather is just beautiful. It's a really nice, crisp autumn day.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thanks a lot, Timothy. And before we close the live stream, once again, I would like to say thanks a lot to our sponsors, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanachu at kanachu.com and James Howell, plus Houze Inc. and Hana Urshizawa Howell. Well, we are very grateful to both of you and the companies that you lead for being our sponsors and allowing us to promote you here on this podcast. Timothy, one more word from you before we finish.
Election starts in 2 days. Once it gets 10 days into it, Dan Hirata and I will have a special briefing to tell you what's the prognosis for the campaign for the current prime minister. Stay tuned. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy.
I don't hear you clicking.